One of the most common questions that you'll hear regarding the Bible out there is, who did Cain marry? And the story of Cain and Abel appears in chapter 4 of the Bible. The answer to the question is in chapter 5. It says, "And the days of Adam after he begot Seth were 800 years, and he begot sons and daughters." So there's the answer. Now, if you want to study this issue in more detail, that's what this Bible study is about, so here we go. When I was 21 years old, I petitioned an American history course in one of the colleges that I attended, and I didn't end up taking the course for scheduling reasons and various other reasons. But on the first day of class, the professor handed out 3x5 cards, and he asked us to answer a number of questions. And one of the questions was, how long has man been on the earth? And I thought that was kind of an odd question. And I knew the answer that he was fishing for because it was a public school. There's not a lot of people that state their religious beliefs if they're Christians in the public school system because you get fired if you do. But I wasn't going to pretend that I believed some other worldview, and so I wrote the Bible answer. And in the next day of class, he said, "I noticed that some people wrote the Bible version of history, and I just want everybody to know that we don't subscribe to that in this course." And that wasn't a surprise to me because I had been attending public schools my entire life. But then he said, "For all those people out there who believe in the Bible version of history, I want to ask you a question. Who did Cain marry?" And to him, that was the ultimate evidence, I guess, that the Bible is not true. So in this video, I'm going to answer the question of who did Cain marry, if people really want to know the answer. But to be honest with you, this question really demonstrates an ignorance of the Bible, a willing ignorance of the Bible, because think about what chapter of the Bible this is and what book this issue appears. It's the first book of the Bible, chapter 4. I believe that people don't really want to read the Bible, so they're looking for any excuse that they can come up with to not have to read the rest. So they get to chapter 4 and they notice that Cain's wife is not mentioned by name. And so they think, well, where does she come from? Who is she? And they close the book and then they go around trying to present this idea that the Bible is just a bunch of nonsense and fables. Well, again, we're going to answer this question. So Adam and Eve had Cain, and then they had Abel. Cain killed Abel. Then they had a son named Seth. And according to the Bible, all the people that exist today are descended from Seth. But where did Cain's wife come from? The answer is in the next chapter. The very next chapter is the answer to the question. And people may have other questions that are relating to this topic, but we're going to go over those also. But chapter 5, verse 4, it says, "And the days of Adam after he had begotten Seth were 800 years, and he begot sons and daughters." So when a man and a woman have children, there's a 50% chance that you'll have a boy and a 50% chance that you'll have a girl. So many of the children that Adam and Eve had were girls. So that's the answer to the question. Now, a lot of people are going to bring up a number of other questions. So let's address those. For example, how could people marry sisters? How is that even possible? Because today, that's not really possible. Well, it's possible, but it's obviously not a good thing. And another question that people are going to bring up is, why is it that Cain's wife was not mentioned by name? So we're going to address those two questions, but I want to start off by noting that if we consider Adam and Eve to be the first generation, and the reason that I clarify that they would be the first generation is sometimes in the study of genetics they name the generations differently, but I'm just going to consider Adam and Eve to be the first generation. It's interesting to note that only 3 children are mentioned in the second generation. Only 3 are mentioned by name. 3 boys, Cain, Abel, and Seth. That's it. But If Adam and Eve were made perfectly, if their bodies were almost perfectly made, and they lived to be 900 years, obviously they had more children than those three boys. They could have had 30 children or 50 children or even 100 children. Remember, when God cursed Eve, he said that he was going to multiply her conception. So she was going to have a lot more children more often. So it's interesting that no women are named in the second generation. And of all the boys that Adam and Eve had, only 3 of them are actually mentioned. So let's address these issues. First of all, why is it that the wife of Cain is not mentioned by name? Well, if you go to chapter 5 of Genesis, it gives us the line of Seth. It says that Seth had Enos, and Enos had Canaan, and Canaan had Mahalaleel. I can't pronounce that name, and then he had Jared, and so on and so forth. But what's interesting about this lineage given in chapter 5 is that not one woman in this lineage is mentioned by name. If you go to the story of Noah, Noah had a wife, but her name was not mentioned. His 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, they had wives, but not one of their names are mentioned. If you go to the lineage given of Jesus in Matthew, we have an ancestry given in Matthew of Jesus, and we also have an ancestry given in the book of Luke. One is from the line of Mary, and one is from the line of Joseph. Most of those women in that lineage were not named. They were not mentioned, but of course we know that the men had wives. There's a few names given because of the historical relevance, but most of those women are not mentioned by name. So it's very common, not only in the Middle East in Bible times, but it's very common all around the world for the names of women to be omitted from lineages. I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong. I'm not commenting on that at all. I'm just saying that that's the way it's often done. And to this day, in most cases, at least in the United States, in most cases, not all, but in most cases, when a woman gets married, she takes the man's name. And so the Bible is referring to a patriarchal society. So that answers the question, I guess, of why this woman was not named, because there are no women named in the second generation. Even though we know that Adam and Eve had sons and daughters, none of them are named. So I don't know why the women are not named. I'm not commenting on whether or not it was right or wrong. I'm just explaining, because people seem to think that this proves that the Bible is somehow not credible, but it doesn't really do that, does it? So the second issue that we need to address is, how could they marry sisters? Because today we don't marry a close relation because it causes genetic problems. And actually, Moses was given commandments by God not to marry a close relation. So even God knew about this issue of genetic problems when people marry who are closely related. So how could they do this? Well, I want you to think about something very, very important. If you're an evolutionist, if you're an atheist, what religion do you believe in? Well, you believe that billions of years ago there was some single-celled organism, something came out of some puddle somewhere, and that gave birth to pretty much every organism that we know today. Evolutionists believe that we're all descended from a common ancestor. So the question that I would ask you is, how is that possible? I mean, Christians believe that the people are related to each other. We don't believe that we're related to the plants or the animals. So if you think it's a big problem that, people can't marry a close relation, well, you've got a much, much bigger problem, because according to you, everything is related. So how could you have all this diversity when everything came from one single-celled organism? I can't even begin to imagine the problems that would occur through that. So both Christians and evolutionists believe that we have a common ancestor. but the problem is greater for evolutionists. But let's answer this question. How is it that they could marry a close relation? Well, according to current genetic theory, the reason that we can't marry a close relation is because there are mistakes in the gene code. So you get 23 chromosomes from mom and 23 chromosomes from dad. But if both dad and mom have a defective gene, then that means that you have no functional gene that performs whatever that gene performs. And so you could have some real problems. But if you go back all the way to the time of Adam and Eve, which was shortly after God created the world, a perfect world, and said that it was very good, would there have been genetic mistakes? And the answer is no. There may have been a few genetic mistakes, but not enough to make much of a difference. And, a lot of people out there say, well, I don't really care about this one way or the other because I don't believe the Bible. I don't believe that this story ever happened. I think that Genesis is just a bunch of fables and myths. And I don't think there was a worldwide flood, and I don't believe anything in the Bible. But I'm reminded of what Jesus said. If I have told you of earthly things, and you believe them not, how will you believe if I tell you of heavenly things? If we can't even believe what God tells us when it comes to this earth, then how can we believe the things of heaven? Well, if you're an atheist, I guess you don't really have a desire to believe that God is going to give us eternal life. But to me, that's a pretty hopeless existence, because if this earth is it's not enough for me. It's just not enough. But why is it that people focus on this question? Why is it that they believe that this question is such an important question? Well, again, it has to do with people's reluctance to read the Bible. The question is based on a complete ignorance of just about everything that the book of Genesis says. And it's not a surprise that people would be ignorant about this, because I think they ask the question because they're trying to come up with a justification for why they don't have to read the Bible.